everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Nikki Maduro Show. I am so excited. And I use the word excited liberally here because we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, but something that gets us very, very upset, which of course is PG&E. We have Loretta Lynch back on the show in just a moment, and she is our expert and our go-to because we know our rates are going up. We know that the fires are going to come again. We also know that PG&E isn't doing enough. So what can we do and what is the latest we will get into? Now, before we get to Loretta, please, you guys, click the thumbs up button. Show your support for the show. Our super chat is live, whether you're watching this live or it's recorded. So just click the $ under the chat box, and we appreciate every donation you can give us. But the number one way to support the show, of course, is to become a Madorable, an official Patreon subscriber, a monthly Patreon subscriber, whatever you can afford. And we know with our PG&E bills and Christmas here that times are tough. But if you can support the show in this way, we do appreciate it. Just go to thenikkimadoroshow.com. thenikkimadoroshow.com. Our Patreon link is there. Our PayPal link. Just go to paypal.com and put in the email address, thenikkimadoroshow@gmail.com. Our merch shop is there, my list of favorite things. All of these links, like I say every show, are in the show notes, and we appreciate you oh so very much. So let's get into it and welcome one of the former heads of the California Public Utilities Commission and now an advocate for all of us against what PG&E is doing, Loretta Lynch. Loretta, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nikki. And just so you know, I was an advocate for consumers when I was on the commission, too.
There you go.
It was a hard row to hoe because most of those commissioners are pretty co-opted.
And I love that you said that because I feel like that is the crux of the problem, right? That we constantly talk about is this question of how can PG&E do X? Isn't there anybody watching out for us? And it's supposed to be the CPUC. Bring people up to speed a little bit, though, on the latest news, of course. Last week on the show, we had Mark Toney with Turn On talking about these rate increases that are coming. And Turn is proposing caps on how much PG&E can raise our rates. So what is your thinking behind this? Is this just just going to have to accept that this is life living in California and PG&E can do whatever it wants to?
Well, no, because we have elected representatives that we can complain to and that we can hold accountable, because that's really what this is all about. The PG&E and the other states' utilities have realized it's a whole lot easier to co-opt 3 of the 5 folks on the PUC than to actually do their job and reduce wildfires, increase safety, increase reliability at reasonable prices. So every dollar that they spend is a dollar we give them. And every penny of profit is a penny of profit we give them. And we, being the PUC, allows them to take it from us. And let's just set a context here. PG&E's rate increases have been and continue to be outrageous. From 2020 to September of 2023, PG&E's rates increased 51%. 51%. When the consumer price index only increased 16%. So we are outstripping actual inflation and other price increases by more than 3 times. That's egregious, it's unnecessary, and it's unsubstantiated. And we have no place farther to look than the PUC itself.
Right.
A very courageous administrative law judge just recently said no to PG&E. Because as you know, from 2020 to 2023, the rates increased 51%. But that they weren't done because they had another rate increase ready to go.
Yes.
Starting first. And the PUC's administrative law judge said no. You know, PG&E has not made its case. It should not be thrown a bunch of our money to do a bunch of way too expensive things that actually aren't going to make us safer. So the administrative law judge rejected a big chunk of PG&E's request and said, no, you can only underground, which is just extraordinarily expensive and often unnecessary. You can only underground 200 miles of your 10,000 mile system. So what happened? Cruise, autonomous vehicle company that has now no longer operated because it ran over a lady.
Right.
Cruise's former general counsel, who's now on the PUC, wrote a different decision than the ALJ and said, oh no, let's give them pretty much everything they want. So they did. So on top of the 51% rate increase through September of 2023, we're going to have another almost 13% rate increase that hits on January 1st. So that's another $30 to $35 a month for most people. But what's really egregious here is the PUC has allowed PG&E to profiteer off of poor people.
Mm-hmm.
So our CARE program, which is for people who make essentially $60,000 and less, or families $75,000 or less, you can get a discount on your utility bill. That discount is shrinking into a tiny nothingness because from 2020 to 2023, CARE customers' rates went up 67%, 4 times the rate of inflation and price increases. And so CARE people who can afford at least are being squeezed even more, if you can imagine, than the rest of us. But PG&E is now going to, for 2020 to 2023 entirely, have a rate increase of almost 64%
That's crazy.
totally. But that's not enough because you think at some point that, the greedy little buggers would stop. But no, on December 1st, PG&E filed for another rate increase. They'd like an interim rate increase of another almost $2 billion. And they want that interim rate increase to be imposed as of March. Now we're just getting a almost 13% increase January 1st, but they'd like some more, please. And so what they've said is we need another almost $2 billion, $1.86 billion in March before we prove that we need it. So just give it to us in advance, which is very pernicious if the PUC says yes to this, because it will be one of the first times the PUC lets them take our money without even looking at the facts. So in some sense, okay, the PUC has given it up to them no matter what, generally. Right. Maybe it's just more honest to say we don't even need to look at the facts. They just get whatever they ask for. So they're kind of ripping the Band-Aid of pretense off of their job and saying, yeah, we'll just throw money at them. We'll throw your money at them. We'll give them your money as much as they want. But what that really means is people are hurting and our economy's hurting. And as bad as it is, which is just extraordinary for people, for California families, it's even worse for California small businesses, because California small businesses have the top 2 highest rates in the nation because of our PUC and its failure to rein in utility costs. That's what we're looking at.
I'm speechless a little bit, Loretta, when you so eloquently laid it out, the frightening horror that is to come for PG&E customers who have no other option. I think that's not every time I talk about PG&E and our electricity rates, I know that solar is an option, but not for everybody. There is normally, if there's a customer and they're ripping people off, and they're charging astronomical fees for something, we, the consumer, have a choice to take our business elsewhere, but we don't. Why? And I know every time I ask you the same question, and I know that you started off by saying you're elected officials, but why are our elected officials not doing anything?
Because they can shunt it off to this regulatory agency that is severely compromised. And so they do, because PG&E is a big political player and a big campaign player as well, as are all the private utilities. Why? Because they take our money from which they're profiteering and give it away in campaign contributions and charitable contributions and all sorts of contributions, and then come back to the PUC and say, we need some more, please. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, similar to the NRA, do you think, Loretta, that there could be some shame involved in taking money from PG&E from these elected officials, that we, the voters, we, the Californians, should be looking into the background of some of these elected representatives that are supposed to represent us and be like, why are you taking so many donations from PG&E while this company is robbing us blind with all of these rate increases?
Absolutely. We should totally make it shameful to take money from the private utilities, political money from the private utilities, just like it is shameful for California Democrats to take money from tobacco companies or gun manufacturers. They won't take that money anymore because we, the people, have made it too politically precarious for them to take it. So
Mm.
let's add PG&E and all the other private utilities to that list of shame on you for taking their money and not doing your job to make sure the PUC reins in their costs. And it's not just me saying that. The state auditor in August issued a scathing audit saying the PUC is not doing its job. And also, the consumer group within the PUC, called the Public Advocates, are not doing their job to actually take a hard look at utility costs and cut them. So the auditor said that at the beginning of 2023, now remember, we already had one rate increase this year, and we're going to have another one. California had the seventh highest average electricity rates across the state. Now, PG&E's rates are higher than those in Southern California. And also, in just 1 year, just in 2022, California electricity rates rose between 16 and 23%. We cannot, as families and businesses and our economy, withstand this profligate spending and the PUC's failure to do its job. So the auditor has a roadmap for our elected officials and for our governor. And what's extraordinary is the PUC, in response to this audit, said, essentially, there's nothing we can do. The PUC said that it cannot implement the state auditor's recommendations to take a hard look at costs. Yes, they can.
Why? Why would they say
Exactly.
that?
Well, and the auditor called it out as remarkable that the PUC itself says that they can't do their job when in fact the PUC has broad statutory authority to develop rules, all the rules that govern how the utilities apply for costs, how they prove their costs, and to compel the utilities to provide all information necessary to justify those costs,
Seems
which the
reasonable.
auditor said the PUC is not doing. So ultimately, we need to hit the PUC where it hurts. And this legislature needs to say no to the PUC's budget. Just no, you don't get a budget to regulate because you're not regulating. So therefore, we're not going to pay you to not do your job anymore.
Thank
We're
you.
going to hold up your budget until you do your job. That's what the legislature needs to do.
Is there anybody that you know of that's doing that?
No. But
Why?
we're also not
They all
collectively
pay.
asking people to do it, right? We need to collectively say, hey, you got to stop this. You got to make the PUC do their job and take a very sharp pencil to these profligate costs. I mean, for instance, it was very clear that PUC could have sided with the facts and the administrative law judge in this last extraordinary rate increase and just said no to a lot of PG&E's excessive costs. But instead, one of the five commissioners took the time and effort to write a whole new decision that gave PG&E substantially everything they wanted.
Mm.
They kind of cut $1 billion out of their almost $16 billion request and said, oh, look at us, we cut some. But
No.
what they didn't do is follow the facts and what PG&E had actually proved from that courageous ALJ that said, no, they didn't prove these costs as necessary. So no, we shouldn't give it to them. And that plus what they did in 2022, which was allow PG&E to keep excess profits. PG&E during the pandemic collected more profits than they were authorized to collect. And instead of returning promptly all the excess profits to the ratepayers, they asked the PUC, okay, can we keep those profits?
And they
And the
said, yeah.
PUC said yes. So the utilities overall in California got to keep almost $800 million in profits that they admitted were in excess of the very generous profits they were already authorized to collect. So as long as the PUC is going to say, oh yeah, no harm, no foul, we give you 10.25% of every dollar in profits. We give you 10 cents in profits, and you collected more than that. You collected 11 or 12 cents, and you don't have to give that back to the ratepayer. Well, then the PG&E and all the other utilities know it's open season. So ask for the stars and the moon
Yeah.
and the sun, because maybe you won't get every single star, but you'll get the moon and the sun. It's just this system is unsustainable.
Right.
64% in 3 years. Or, well, it'll be 4 years because of this rate increase that goes into effect in January. 64%. No other region in the country is paying that kind of an increase for, frankly, substandard and dangerous service.
And again, and I know we always call it Governor Newsom, but it's an abject failure on his part for someone that stands up and talks about price gouging oil companies and gas and all that stuff. This is a bill that we get every month that is it's going to bankrupt people. You talked about the care program and the low income people, even if you're on a fixed income. I mean, how are you supposed to be able to afford these kind of jumps? Here's my other question, Loretta. When you're talking about the CPUC and the people,
Mhm.
they get PG&E bills too, I'm assuming. Don't they get tired? Like, that's my thought. Don't they pay these higher rates too? Or do they have some free electricity they're getting just because they're on the CPUC?
They don't get free electricity, but some of them live in SMUD territory, and some of them live in LADWP territory. So, as we know, government-owned utilities, which are called municipal utilities, have much lower rates
Right.
and much better service, much better safety records, much better reliability records. And they don't propose these boondoggles of profiteering just to pad their profit bottom line. So this is why PG&E wants to underground 1,000 miles of their system, because right now those transmission lines that are hanging in the air are fully depreciated, meaning PG&E has wrung every penny of profit out of them they already could. And so they only get paid for the entirety of the cost of maintaining them and using them. But they don't get profit on those lines. But if they underground them, that's a new line and it's a new source of profit.
Mhm.
And their estimates for how much it costs to underground have gone up
Of
exponentially.
course. Of course they
Just 10 years ago, PG&E said it cost about $360,000 a mile to underground a line. Guess what their estimate is now?
How much?
Over $6 million a mile.
Oh my God.
How shameful is that, that they just cooked up
Some
a
number.
price increase, some number, and it is absolutely positively the fact that you can't go from $360,000 a mile 10 years ago to $6 million a mile now in a fact-based way. It's fantasy. It's their profiteering fantasy that they've put in front of the PUC, and then urge the PUC to give them the money before the PUC even looks at the numbers, because they know those numbers are not justifiable.
Yeah. It's crazy. I want to add this next thing into the conversation. And this has to do with the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. One of our listeners, Lee, wrote in this email, and it actually was a while ago, but it was after the last time we talked. She says, "I think I'm reading this right, but it sounds like PG&E wants me to pay for their own employees. As a business, shouldn't they be responsible?" And she sent me this picture of this notice that she received, a
Mhm.
notice of PG&E company's request to increase rates for its DCPP, Diablo Canyon Power Plant, employee retention application. I am assuming, but give us the details, that this has to do with the fact that they want to keep the plant going now.
Well, the governor announced that he wanted to keep the plant going
Right.
through 2030 so that when he runs for president, he won't have that pesky issue of the Diablo Canyon plant because it'll already have been decided and we'll already be paying through the nose. But the point is, we've already paid for Diablo Canyon. We paid over and over for Diablo Canyon. It's been open since the mid 1980s, and we have fully paid for the cost of that plant. The problem is, for the last 3 to 4 years, PG&E has thought that they were going to close the plant because at that point, under the standards that existed just 5 years ago, they couldn't prove to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that the plant was safe. And so they stopped investing in maintenance and they told the workers, hey, this plant's closing in 2025. And they made a deal with consumers and environmentalists to close the plant because their license ran out in 2025. And the NRC had told them at the time, you can't get no new license because you're on an earthquake fault and there's a
Right.
tsunami risk and you can't fix that. So they've basically been running this plant with chewing gum and baling wire for the last several years, which is why it breaks down more than almost any other plant in the country. It's offline because they haven't been maintaining it because they were going to shut it. So then last year, the governor says, oh, yeah, let's not shut it because basically because our electricity markets are being gamed. And we know that there have been some times where we're on the ragged edge of shortage. And
Right.
he's been convinced that, oh, well, we need the plant. Instead of fixing the electricity markets, we're just going to throw money at this aging, frankly, unsafe plant. So the problem is you've got a lot of workers in that San Luis Obispo area who were told, hey, we're going to pay you a severance and then we're going to close the plant. So they're looking for other jobs, and some of them have gotten other jobs. So what the writer to the show wrote in about was, hey, PG&E wants to spend more money to give bonuses to those workers that they told, hey, we're going to essentially at some point give you a severance and lay you off, to give them a bonus to stay for the next 5
So we
years.
have to pay for that.
Oh, of course. Understand, every single penny that PG&E spends comes from us. There's this myth of there is shareholder money. We pay for that shareholder money. It's just a bucket of the money we give. And the PUC calls that bucket shareholder money, and another bucket labor costs, and another bucket maintenance costs. Every single penny that PG&E gets and spends comes from us. You and me and California businesses pay for everything. It's a good gig if you can get it, because you also get 10% profit, as if you're taking a risk as a
Right.
company, which they're not. So my concern about Diablo Canyon is frankly not, well, my concern is, one, PG&E has run the hell out of that plant for years without properly maintaining it. So we just paid top dollar for a broken down jalopy nuclear plant. That doesn't sound like a good gig. And we did pay top dollar because we're paying another $2 billion with a B to run that plant for 5 more years, 2 billion, I think, a year. When it hasn't cost 2 billion to run that plant each year. So PG&E basically held the governor up, by metaphorical gunpoint, and said, you want us to keep running this plant? You'll pay our price. And that's what happened. And the PUC rubber stamped that. And so we are paying through the nose for a broken down old jalopy plant that they haven't invested any maintenance in for a long, long time. That sits on an earthquake and has a tsunami risk that cannot be mitigated.
And I mean, obviously, if we're paying out the nose to run this plant for 5 years, um, I understand the need to address our electricity problems. Now, you're saying they gamed the system. We could fix our market, but they're choosing to go the Diablo way. Within the next 5 years, are we gonna be able to fix the system that we're not gonna keep the Diablo open even longer?
Well, that's the question, because basically California applied to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for an exemption to the current safety standards for the next 5 years. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has essentially, they haven't finally said it, but they've essentially said in preliminary decisions, okay, fine, but that's it. Well, 5 years ago, they said, okay, fine, it's it. You're not going to get a new license in 2025. But the governor prevailed upon the president and others to give us an exemption to safety standards that the NRC promulgated after Fukushima. Because PG&E for years was saying, we're fine because we're up on a cliff. If you've ever been down there, the nuclear power plant stands right on the ocean, but on a cliff.
Right.
And they're like, we'll never have a tsunami that's more than 20 feet high. Well, Fukushima proved that factually incorrect.
Mhm.
And they can't move the plant. And so it's on an earthquake fault. So who knows what happens to that plant in an earthquake? Who knows what happens to all those radioactive rods that are in this cooling pool? Because if they hit each other in the cooling pool, if the cooling pool shakes, they'll spark. And don't even want to go there in terms of how dangerous that is. But there's no place to put that spent fuel, because so they have temporary on-site storage. Oh my God. So there's just so many safety issues that are involved with that plant that if people knew, they'd run. So regardless of whether you're for or against nuclear energy, that particular plant is not safe.
Right.
PG&E has not spent the necessary money to make it safe, and they cannot mitigate against the earthquake and
Right.
tsunami risk that is inherent in where they place the plant. What are we doing rolling the dice that we're not going to have a major earthquake through 2030 that's going to really wipe out some serious part of California because of that plant and how unsafe it is at top dollar.
At top
So
dollar.
PG&E is going to make a ton more money off that plant, and we're going to pay. And and frankly, because that's already the gig, I would rather pay to make it as safe as possible and have the trained workers there than try to train people from scratch at this point.
But it's not as if that notice that, our viewer emailed to me, it's not like they're asking us. They're never asking us, right? It's just a notice that you're gonna pay more because we need to pay the workers and give them their bonuses to keep this power plant open, which I agree with you. I don't want it to be continually run with chewing gum and wire. I do want it run properly and safely, but again, like you've said, earthquakes, tsunamis, you can't mitigate against that. So we're just gonna hold our breath for the next 5 years and then hope that they don't get another extension, right? Because they could
Well,
also get another extension.
and hope that the plant actually can run, because this plant is one of the worst performing nuclear power plants in the nation
Ugh,
because of its maintenance issues and its age. And so we're paying top dollar supposedly for reliability, but when we needed it the most in 2020, it didn't run, or it ran at a very low level and not at its usual capacity. So one of the reasons for the blackouts in 2020 was because the PG&E Diablo Canyon Unit 1 was taken offline because of operational safety issues. So we're paying as if the money means power when it may not,
yeah,
because of the age and how rickety and how unmaintained the plant is.
it
So
is
we may be
frightening.
paying for nothing, and we may just be paying for an earthquake disaster, and we may be paying for power. And it's a shell game and a crapshoot about which one we're going to get for the next 5 years. Thank you very much. And do you trust the PUC to have actually looked at this before they rubber stamp the governor's proposal?
No,
I don't.
nope. Do you think if we had another governor that this would be addressed? I mean, I don't. I do lay it at the feet of Governor Newsom. He's the governor. Very obviously close with PG&E and the CPUC, and this is happening under his watch. Do you think that when the time comes that Governor Newsom is no longer Governor Newsom, the next person is going to be able to do something about this?
Well, sadly, Governor Brown wasn't any better when it came to
Right.
PG&E, tied his ticks with PG&E. And Governor Schwarzenegger, the one thing he did do was back solar,
Right.
but he was pretty tight with the utilities as well. And his commission was pretty tight with utilities. They did not allow such profligate rate increases or such profligate um, profit levels. Although I'm not a big fan of Schwarzenegger in many ways, but his PUC did take a pencil from time to time. Although they also made some really stinky fossil fuel deals. So when you look at the history of our governors in the last 20 years, we do not have any shining examples of anyone who's protecting consumers or the environment or the health and safety of California.
Yeah.
But hope springs eternal because it's going to be a very competitive race in 2026. And there too, that's where your listeners can make a difference, because that 2026 race will kick off at least by 2025. So in at least, in 13 months, we're off to the races for governor. And we should hold all candidates accountable for how they will approach the PUC and the utilities. And we should make that an integral part of who we vote for.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's the number one issue facing Californians right now, as far as economically.
Sure,
This is a bill that
absolutely.
is just astronomically going up. It's insane. And like you've been saying, we're not really any safer at this point.
No.
I mean, they have these plans to underground these lines. The ones that they choose aren't even in areas where they actually need them, as we've talked about before. And so let's talk a bit about, wildfire safety programs. And the failures of PG&E to actually do something about it.
Well, and it's not just me. If you read the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety in the
I love
Natural
to do that on my
Resources,
free time. I really love
yeah,
to do that,
exactly.
Loretta.
In the Natural Resources Agency, this June, they rejected PG&E's wildfire mitigation plan. It's called a WMP because they love acronyms. And according to law, the PG&E is supposed to submit a plan about how they're going to prevent and lessen wildfires every 3 years. And the legislature a couple of years ago took that review out of the PUC because they thought the PUC was so compliant and complicit, and was just rubber stamping PG&E's plans, and put it in a different agency, the Natural Resources Agency, and they created this new Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. And that office in June rejected PG&E's proposed plan, saying it had critical deficiencies, and what PG&E was emphasizing as priorities would not make us safer, would not make us safer. And so they required PG&E to resubmit a plan according to all the critical deficiencies that they identified, which PG&E did. And now this office is taking comments on that plan. But the problem here is PG&E is acting as if this plan has already been approved, and they're going to the PUC, this new $2 billion request is as if their plan, which hasn't been approved yet, was approved, and please give us the money to implement a plan that has not yet been authorized, that was called out in the summer by the governor's Natural Resources Agency as critically deficient and not ensuring safety. PG&E, for instance, does not demonstrate how it will address its growing backlog of repairs. PG&E's undergrounding plan may leave wildfire risk unaddressed in the highest risk areas. PG&E does not provide even standards for most of its vegetation management, meaning tree trimming inspection programs, and PG&E does not adequately address critical risk from hazard trees. PG&E's decision-making process does not account for basically transmission circuits, which will lead to more power shutoffs than are needed. That is not me. I am reading from this rejection of their plan in the summer. And that is, let's just say, already tempered bureaucratic speak. So we know that PG&E's plans from the governor's own Natural Resources Agency are critically deficient and won't do it. But PG&E and the PUC aren't going to let a little thing like facts stand in their way of raising rates again.
Because the CPUC is not going to reject their request just because of what you just read. And this again goes to the problem of regulation.
Yes.
And again, when people die, when people's homes are burned down, the Press Democrat just had an article regarding the fire victim trust selling its remaining shares of PG&E stock. There's people that are waiting for money because of the lawsuits and everything that have come, from PG&E caused wildfires. That if Can you explain to us how us, the ratepayers, are impacted by PG&E paying out for wildfire victims?
This might be perhaps one of the most egregious things that PG&E has ever done. And you have to say the bar is pretty high on that standard, which is they used wildfire victims pre-2019. They got the governor to change the law in ways that are just extraordinarily pro-PG&E in 2019. And some of these cost increases are essentially those chickens coming home to roost. But pre-2019 wildfire victims, so we're talking the Camp Fire, and I think the Tubbs Fire, and the Coffee Park Fire, right? Some horrible fires. They used those people essentially as human shields to get the law changed in 2019. They told the wildfire victims they would not get compensation unless the law changed. So the wildfire victims flooded Sacramento begging people to change the law so that they would get paid. And then incredibly cynically, PG&E filed for bankruptcy, and as part of the bankruptcy settlement, they screwed over those same wildfire victims. So this wildfire victim trust was funded at a level that would never pay the wildfire victims in full. If anything, estimates at the time, and my estimates were that the wildfire victims were going to get 20 to 30 cents on the dollar.
Wow.
Well, I was too optimistic because what happened was PG&E appointed a trustee. So this bucket of money was $13.5 billion to pay the pre-2019 wildfire victims. because they were clearly, PG&E was clearly negligent and clearly was going to owe them damages. And so some shareholder money, remember, we pay the shareholders, and the PUC allowed PG&E to keep a bunch of unauthorized profits. So the shareholders basically just took from the overflowing bucket and put some of that money into the Wildfire Victims Trust. And then the ratepayers also put more than half the money into the Wildfire Victims Trust. So $13.5 billion were supposed to go to the wildfire victims. The problem is the trustee, within 3 years, spent over $1 billion of that on administrative expenses.
Of
So
course.
now we have less than $13.5 billion. So it's not going to be 30 cents on the dollar because the trustee basically wasted a bunch of money on his cronies, hired all sorts of people to assess the wildfire victims' claims rather than just pay them. And so that's one of the big reasons why most wildfire victims, or at least a substantial group of them, haven't been paid yet. It's egregious how PG&E structured that deal, how they screwed over the wildfire victims, and how they used them to get statutory changes that PG&E will be laughing all the way to the bank for at least another decade. We have got to change the law back to hold PG&E accountable, because that law basically said post 2019, unless PG&E was willfully negligent, which many had interpreted to mean criminally responsible, then automatically the ratepayers are going to pay for all the damages. So PG&E held up the damages for people that they were actually liable to until they could get the law changed to say, hey, the ratepayers' pockets are open for our negligence. And then very crassly, what's been happening is PG&E's been settling out these indictments that the Butte County and the Shasta County DAs have been going after PG&E for post 2019 wildfires for civil penalties. So the DA dismisses the criminal case, thereby putting the ratepayer on the hook. And then PG&E says, hey, we'll give you a bunch of money as long as we don't have to admit liability, and it's only a civil fine, so that they get themselves under this. The ratepayer pays no matter what new law that the governor promoted and pushed through. And so
I
that's
mean,
another reason why our rates are going up, because PG&E has no motivation or incentive not to continue to be negligent,
right.
because we're on the hook for their negligence. As long as they can convince DAs to stop, to not go to criminal trial, so that they don't get criminally convicted again. As you know, they have over 100 criminal felonies that they've either pled to or been convicted of. But that was pre-2019 when they got the law changed. So as long as they're only civilly negligent, you and I pay for their negligence.
I mean, this is kind of a silly, but I just keep thinking it when you talk about these decisions. Is there nobody with a soul on PG&E or CPUC? And I really don't mean that as a joke. It's just,
Yeah.
is there nobody there that really wants to do right by us, the ratepayers? Are they just all dirty?
Well, I think it's more co-opted. I'll say that. Maybe some people are in fact dirty, but I think it's more co-opted. You go into the system, and I can tell you this is what happened to me. And the staff and the lobbyists tell you, you can do A or you can do B, but you have to pay us. And it was only because I had a legal training, and I just rejected somebody telling me I could only do one or two and that we were going to pay through the nose regardless, that I really dug in and had my staff dig into what was our authority. And the auditor is right. The PUC has broad authority to reject this bullshit,
Good.
but they just don't do it because there's this relentless pressure to go along and do what the utilities say. And it's not just from the utilities and their lobbyists. It can also be from your appointing authority, which is the governor and the governor's office. And so eventually I broke with my appointing authority, Governor Gray Davis, and said, look, I got to protect the ratepayers. That's my job.
Mm-hmm.
When the governor was basically telling me, make a deal, make a deal, make a deal. And so if you want a political future, then it's a whole lot easier to have a political future if you go along and get along. And just look at where some of the former commissioners have ended up.
Right.
You've probably seen the commercials with Carla Peterman. She was a commissioner who I would just say was incredibly generous to the utilities when she was on the commission. And then she got a $1 million deal with Southern California Edison and more than $1 million deal now with PG&E. So she's sitting pretty, as are several other commissioners who have gone into the companies that they regulated.
Right.
And so we need to not tighten up, we need to actually enforce and make stronger those ethical walls that don't allow that revolving door. Because you've got all this pressure to go along and get along, political pressure, staff pressure, lobbyist pressure, and you don't have a lot of resources at the commission unless you seek them out to figure out another way. And then you've got money right over here. Hey,
Yeah, I'll pay you.
hey, when you're done with your PUC job, do I have a job for you, baby?
Ugh,
And,
it's
and then and
dirty.
then we also have the folks who come from the utilities, like Commissioner Reynolds, who came from Cruz and has been a leader in making sure the PUC rubber stamped Cruz's applications until finally the DMV stepped in because Cruz was unsafe.
Yeah.
And the DMV revoked their authorization to drive in California. It wasn't the PUC. The PUC didn't act until they were already until their authorization to drive was revoked. It's
'Cause God
extraordinary,
forbid they should do the right thing.
right?
Um,
And so in that sense, it is it is a system that is designed to cater to and do the will of the utilities. And perhaps what we need to do is just end that system. Because if anything, the purported regulators are lapdogs for the utilities rather than watchdogs. And we
mhm,
might as well just call it factually what it is. I would rather have just actually no regulation and throw those utilities out to um, court suits, lawsuits, than this purported system of regulation, which isn't regulation. And then what happens is the courts then defer to the agency. There was just a big Supreme Court case that was decided just a month ago that said, hey, if the agency is regulating in that sphere, you can't short circuit the agency's regulatory process and take the utility to court. And what it was a bunch of wildfire victims, lawyers, went to the court and said, hey, the PUC isn't doing this. So we want to bring this case to you, court, and show you how PG&E's negligence caused our damages. And this was actually, it was not wildfire victims, it was power safety shutoff victims, right? So
mm.
people who had losses because of all these power shutoffs. And the court said, no, the PUC is looking at that. So as long as they're looking at that, they're the regulatory agency. You got to take your claim to them.
It's ridiculous.
And so now what's happened is the PUC's lack of regulation, but their suggestion that they might regulate is preventing actual plaintiffs with actual damages from being made whole by courts.
That's crazy. I
Yeah.
just I feel like I never wanna leave our conversations feeling as helpless as I often feel while we're having these conversations, if that makes sense, because the last time we were on or the time before that, it was Write Your Governor about the trailer bills, and so many people said that they wrote it, and I put it in the thing, and it always seems like we try, and then it's just the same old, same old. So, Loretta, people are listening, they're probably pissed off as they often are after our conversations.
Mhm.
What do we do? What do we do now? What do we put our focus on? I know we talked about the governor's race coming up 2025, 26. What about before then? I mean, what about caps on increases? What about is there anything more immediate than waiting a few years or 10 years?
Well, so the problem with caps on increases is it has to go through the legislature. So it all comes back to our elected officials. So one, tell your elected official right now, do not approve the PUC's budget until they can show you, elected official, that they are going to be serious about cutting PG&E's costs. Because there's a lot to cut. The auditor itself says so, as does the Natural Resources Agency. Why don't we just look at the actual reports that are out there and do that?
Mhm.
So that's an easy um, ask because there are two reports that have come out in the last, in the summer that say do A and do B, and the PUC is not doing it.
Right.
So make them do that before they get a budget. Why should they get paid to not regulate? Right. So number one. And number two, um, make sure, well, actually, we do need to change the law. We need to allow people to go to court freely regardless of what the PUC is doing. And that might shape the PUC up. So we need two different laws changed. One, there shouldn't be there shouldn't be a statute that says the PUC has primary jurisdiction over all these issues when they're not doing their job. Take that one statute away and people can go to court. And then two, the PUC has special rules for taking their decision to court. And those special rules only apply to the PUC, unlike every other administrative agency in California, and frankly, every other administrative agency across the country. The PUC has special procedural rules, and you don't have a right to go to court after they've made a stupid decision. It's called a discretionary writ to the appellate court instead of an absolute right of appeal to the trial court, like all other administrative agencies. So change that rule. Make the PUC follow the rules that every other administrative agency follows. And then all of a sudden, we'll at least get some court review of their terrible regulatory decisions because they're anti-regulatory. They just give it up to PG&E. And so if we took off the handcuffs of plaintiffs who have damages because of utility negligence going to court and getting court review of those damages, and we took off the limitations on questioning the PUC's bad decisions, then we would actually get some judicial review just like that. And that's not, I think, an anti-utility standpoint. It is a pro access to the court standpoint.
Yeah. And I think that, forcing the elected officials to do those sorts of things and changing those statutes, the laws that you were talking about are important. Um, what about help for people? I know you were talking about how much more low income people are paying to
Yeah.
PG&E.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea of, I mean, I would just assume that there's fewer people being helped in that way. I've even thought, just go through the process of trying to get help with your bill and paying your bill. I mean, is it effective to try at least to go through the process, and are people getting helped in that way?
Well, there were some federal monies from the pandemic that helped people with their back utility bills, but that money's, I
It's long
think, pretty
gone.
much dried up,
Yeah.
or it will have dried up by next month. And then, but even so, because the bills are going up so much, there is a record rate of people who are behind in their utility bills in California, a record rate, and it's higher than other states' rates of falling behind in your utility bills. So that shows us it's not just pandemic related. It's because these rate increases are just
Too high.
unsustainable, and people can't pay them. I mean, who has an extra $500 to $1,000 a year? So
No.
you know what the PUC's answer to that is? Make people's electric bill depend on their income.
Yeah. And we
So
talked
right
about
at
that.
this
No.
moment, the PUC is designing rules that will peg your electric bill to your income, which I think is so outrageous. Uh, it's hard to describe how outrageous that is, but I do think that that's going to get working people up in arms because
Mhm.
that's going to increase people's electric bills even more for no reason. It's not like you're going to get more or better or cleaner or safer electricity. You're just going to pay more because you make more. And then, of course, you've got all those privacy problems because who's going to verify how much you make?
Yeah.
The PUC,
Oh.
PG&E? I don't think so.
And I know we talk about the loss of life from wildfires, but I'm also wondering how many people are going to lose their lives because they don't turn on their heat or they don't turn on their AC because they just can't afford it. I mean, people are literally I'm sitting in a 65-degree house, which I'm used to
Yeah,
now. I'd like it to be a little bit warmer, but some people don't even turn their heat on, and yet they're still paying astronomical rates.
that's right.
They're paying so much and not even getting the service or the electricity that they need to survive. And I can imagine that if this continues, that people just won't turn it on. And unfortunately, some people might get sick and might pass away because of the conditions that they're forced to live in.
And that's been documented in the past. We know that in the 1990s, when other states changed their electric rates in crazy ways, more seniors died in
Yeah.
the summer because they did not use air conditioning because they couldn't afford it.
Hmm.
And so, I live in San Francisco, and in that way, I'm lucky because it's just not that hot. But what about people who live in Livermore or
Yeah.
Stockton? I mean, air conditioning is a public health issue. And so what PG&E says is, oh, we get it. So why don't you ratepayers pay us to have cooling centers? Right? We'll take over like unused malls and unused office space where people can come and hang out in air conditioning because we understand they can't afford air conditioning themselves given our crazy rates. So pay us to create cooling centers for people who can't afford their own air conditioning where they can come sit and maybe use a computer or our electricity um, on hot days.
Yeah.
So that's their fix. Don't fix the rates, just pay us more to have kind of group centers where people can not die.
Right, which is so easy for senior citizens and the disabled and everyone to get, and overnight when it's also hot. It's just
Yeah.
it's not a true answer, and it's so frustrating, but I love having you on because at least I'm talking to somebody that understands what's going on so they can explain it to the rest of us. Loretta Lynch, thank you so much for taking so much time and talking with us. We'll have you back in the new year because none of this, unfortunately, is being solved, and we have to keep the screws on these people, including our elected officials, including the governor, or we're just going to continue to get screwed by PG&E and the CPUC year after year after year. And so, Loretta, thank you so much. I always appreciate you coming on. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a happy holidays. If anybody has a question for Loretta, send it to me, the nikkimadoroshow@gmail.com, and we'll ask it next time because everyone always loves your expertise on this issue. So thank you so much.
Well, Nikki, thank you very much for shining a light on all this PG&E egregiousness and the PUC's egregiousness. And my only concern is that your listeners go to Patreon and support you,
Thank
because
you.
otherwise you're not going to be able to afford to shine that light because the light's too expensive.
Exactly. I need to keep the lights on, people. So please sign up to be an official Madorable. Loretta Lynch, thank you so much. Have a happy new year, and we'll talk in 2024. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much, Nikki.
Bye-bye. All right, so that's our show. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be back again live tomorrow. And then Thursday is my final live show of 2023. I do have stuff in the can, though. I have some interesting interviews that will air Christmas week, but I will be out of town. I love each and every one of you. We will talk again tomorrow. Again, click the thumbs up button. Show your support for the show. The super chat is live. And like Loretta Lynch said, please consider signing up for our Patreon. Just go to thenikkimadoroshow.com. thenikkimadoroshow.com. Our Patreon link is there. All of the ways to donate to the show. My email address, thenikkimadoroshow@gmail.com. Just put that in. Go to paypal.com. Put in hit send money and put thenikkimadoroshow@gmail.com. I appreciate you guys so very much. And until tomorrow, bye-bye.
Nikki, you're all so awesome. You're sprout like a beautiful blossom. You're also the best. I really can't rest. You're all so awesome.
Wow. Okay.